Hello, my name is Iestyn, and I'll be walking you through my sketchbook I used for this project. To start the project, we attended the Arc to understand the capabilities of the space for exhibiting. As a group, we then completed street pet cards as part of our initial research. These pages showcase the ideas of the cards in a collage format that indicate current trends that could speculate our future world. We synthesized the information into 4 key topics that we were most interested in pursuing. We noticed a trend that most of our research that related to health was centered around urban populations, leading us to come up with the concept of focusing on health for rural areas in the future, with cities becoming self-reliant, creating a 2-tiered health system. Our first tutorial allowed us to come up with our first working definition of personal health, in which health is an embodiment of the environment you are situated in. We partook in a studio and then workshop, which allowed us to take our ideas and formulate it into stakeholders, scenarios, and unintended consequences, which we used to conceptualize issues such as transport and dietary changes in the future, and how they might affect our world. Upon reflection, I thought the unintended consequences were a valuable design skill to acquire. Although the film did not reflect the outcome we intended for our world, it helped create future world-building skills as the project progressed. We began conceptualizing these evolving rural areas by addressing the environment they were situated in as a factor for their personal health. To do this, we looked at bioregions, a region that has a particular type of natural environment. They impact personal health as they detect what food materials, weather are in an area that can detect social behaviours negatively or positively. For example, alcohol issues in Europe get worse the further north you travel, which correlates a person's bioregion conditions to their health. I then began to look at bioregionalism and the readings of Gerard Cuprez and Carl Burkhardt, which acknowledge the science of biography of an area, but it instead focuses on the human experience, recognizing indigenous groups as a bioregion in North America, which led to me to believe Scottish communities could be a bioregion too. I then looked at the Scottish rural planning policy, which demonstrated key challenges of rural areas of the future as issues of livability, climate change, and demographic changes. As a group, we began conceptualizing scenarios that could potentially cause migration of people away from cities in the future. We came up with the idea of an agricultural shift towards vertical farming that would lead to the collapse of the current industry. As less land would be needed to produce food, the industry could be moved into urban spaces, which would put the value of traditional farming at risk, incentivizing dietary changes like the vegan diet. We coined the term rapid urban centralization for the movement of people towards these cities, which allows us to ground our ideas into a definition. We came up with scenarios in this future as to what would make residents leave if healthcare would change in rural areas, with people that have severe health conditions having to move to cities due to regional hospital closures as a potential consequence of rapid urban centralization. We also looked at how migration of youth populations would affect these rural areas, with consequences such as workforce shortages and a loss of cultural heritage due to an absence of young people to carry on traditions. We then looked at how our exhibition would take shape to express the rural and urban settings in different concepts. We demonstrated the idea in our tutorial, however the issue was there was nothing to ground our ideas on a personal level, and the world was missing that personal aspect. We created personas to find these connections and create a sense of community in our future. The first expert input session gave insight into areas of our world we needed to develop. It was brought up that the urban area did not have their own voice or person that would make the world difficult to identify with. We created a persona that would be situated on a city block for exhibition, that would have the world context to go with it, to create a sense of personas living in the condition of the future. I created collages that showcased the rural personas that would be situated around the exhibition. We created the outlines for these personas based off our previous scenarios and research with vertical farming and an incomer from London to add an element of contention within the community. To get a better sense of what some of the issues rural areas were facing in the current climate, we decided to interview residents of Crianlarich, a town situated in Stirling County, Scotland. The feedback we received from the community felt their voice was not getting heard by the authorities as they were so remote, which tied in our theory of rural isolation. Our exhibition feedback received was that the personas needed to be more futuristic and the rural areas were lacking any value. The speculative incomer to add a different element to these marginalised areas enticed me to think of solutions to this issue. To begin part 2, I looked at different interests from part 1 that I could carry forward for the project. These areas of interest were immigration of refugees to remote spaces, creating a value derived from remote bioregions such as wool, preserving endangered languages such as Gaelic, and air pollution. Refugees and immigration enticed me the most, as it responded to the issue of depopulation outlined by the rural planning policy earlier on in part 1. I speculated what the key issues of refugees in new places were, which was equity and integration, and how these could heal trauma from abandoning their homeland. The workshop with Zoe helped us draw a boundary around our world context and helped me see how my individual project would connect with my group members. To tie the project back to rapid urban centralisation, I imagined immigration was scaled down to a civic level, with the addition of urban working permits as an attempt to hyper-localise work to incentivise people living and working in their bioregions as my first prototype. On reflection, the concept did not relate to personal health, although the concept could benefit dying remote communities. There was no reference to refugees. I wanted to look at refugees' issues in a more speculative manner by looking at the stakeholder as a climate refugee to put a face to the climate crisis. I was inspired by the works of Fabrizio Uratini to create an integration process in the form of a workshop, taking into account their own story, homeland, journey, and expectations. I proposed a scenario in which climate refugees would be able to express their journey through creative practice as a form of community integration and a healing process. I decided the medium of this workshop was going to be weaving, as the concept had strong metaphorical semantics and the skill is a multicultural practice that leaves room for transcultural creations that champion integration. I was fascinated by multi-hyphenation, a design term defined by a career path that involves multiple creative production methods, and speculated if I could apply this method into a community workshop that would teach climate refugees a multitude of skills that they could apply to living and working in their new community. To visualize my workshop, I created a model to showcase at the expert input session, in which I received valuable insight that made me conceptualize the output of the workshop. One expert mentioned if the workshop could be a mutual learning process between the existing community and climate refugees in the form of a collective woven tapestry. However, upon reflection, this idea neglected personal identity of refugees as individuals with their own stories to tell. To go back to the idea of multi-hyphenated workshops that also allowed for self-expression, I posted a 3-step workshop that would begin with refugees creating their own looms, then weaving their journey through written messages of how they migrated onto the fabric. The formative review asked me to think of the longevity of the project and making it less than a novelty. It was clear in this instance I needed to anchor the project in a single message. I began researching the value of participatory design in community participation and personal well-being to demonstrate the value of the project on personal health for the intended recipients. I uncovered through research weaving can act as a form of meditative therapy for participants or a form of self-expression. As a means to build bridges between the two stakeholders, I came up with the concept of a transcultural weave. However, this idea was quickly dismissed as there should not be an expectation for the participants to come up to the workshop bearing high levels of skill. To reflect the insights of the formative review and understand how the concept achieved integration and equity, I created 3 personas that would participate in the workshop. Amongst these were 2 climate refugees from Spain and Greece and a young, lifelong resident of the community. I decided to choose climate refugees from Southern Europe to make the issue of climate-induced displacement closer to home, posing the question of how our concept of refugees will change when the issue affects people close to home as an immediate effect of our actions, climate change. The concept attempts to humanize the effects of climate change into lived experiences of the future. The concept I took forward for the workshop output stemmed from thinking of ways to create meaning to the fabric climate refugees were weaving by creating a system in which refugees and locals donated fabrics to the workshop. This method allowed communal discourse between climate refugees and locals on their fabrics journey, creating an interrelationship between their old life and their new life. Although these fabrics may be seen as precious to the refugees and a loss, it also is the beginning of something new, a tangible metaphor for the life they left behind. I wanted these objects to become more than a novelty. Therefore, I devised outputs that the participants of the workshop could bring home with them, making them functional elements of their new home, which also allowed me to think of the future of these remote Scottish home environments. These pages demonstrate the storyboard and design statement that I took forward to the final expert review session. The experts posed the question if these fabrics could be seen as controversial statements in a community that might not be so welcoming to incomers. However, if we are ever to see a positive levels of integration, communities must look to oppose these beliefs. Whilst practicing weaving, I came across a technique that would leave small holes in the fabric that I thought could be utilized further. The next pages showcase samples of work on to gain skills whilst weaving. The first of my woven outputs was inspired by the persona Miguel Lopez, seeking to tell the story of a climate refugee that comes to the area bearing skills such as carpentry. In a mutual learning process, refugees can showcase their prior skills and teachings to others whilst adopting a new craft in the form of weaving. The next was created from the knowledge possessed by climate refugees with how to regulate room temperature using textiles. The curtain seeks to provoke the question of how rural Scottish communities might combat warmer temperatures in the summer months. Designed to combat insect populations travelling further north due to climate change in 2035, leaving residents of rural communities swarmed by bugs, the woven fabric's holes are tight enough so the wings of flying insects cannot pass through. I then created my poster concepts that were altered with feedback from my tutor to add clarity to my storyboard. Overall, I am satisfied with the outcome of the project. I think my making skills and world building skills have improved immensely through the project and the days of weaving I had to put into for the final outcomes. I also think the expert input sessions were of incredible value as they allowed me to critically reflect on mine and my group's work in the company of a broad range of people, forcing us to cohesively deliver the message of our product so anyone could understand the complex issues we were dealing with.